asked, is that a prayer or a hymn? And yes, it is, right? I hear that a lot. Can I just ask you to do something you're probably already doing? Just have a prayer in your heart that the Spirit can teach you during what we're about to talk about. Because there are things that are so vital that we're about to talk about that we've got to get the Spirit to bury this deep in our hearts. And let's just start here if we can. I'm going to show you a picture of my family. So we have 5 kids, right? And I want to tell you a story about this kid right here. This is Jacob. He's 11 right now. I'm going to tell you about when he was 7. Jacob is the funniest kid. He's got this, when he was 7 years old, he started asking skeptical questions about the church. Like as a 7-year-old. Okay, so Gracie's about 7 in this picture. When Jacob was about that size, he would ask us questions like, so how do we know that the church is really true? And maybe it's one of the other churches. Or maybe even Satan made this church, and we're going to the wrong one. And I'd be like, what? You're 7. Satan made this church? And I'd be like, well, he did it. Well, maybe he did. But he did it, right? I like descend into this 7-year-old mentality. Well, he didn't. But what if he did? Well, he did it, okay? And then I'd say, well, we know it's true because the Spirit bears witness to us. But what if that's not the Spirit? What if that's Satan telling you it's true? And then, so, I'd help him with Galatians and the fruit of the Spirit and all of these things, right? And he was not convinced. This kid had this skepticism, right? And as a parent, kind of like what Brother Hunt was saying earlier, just what you want, what you pray for all the time is that your kids can be converted to Jesus Christ, can feel what you feel, have what you have, right? And today, during this next little part, we're going to talk about how do you help my kids, as Cameron is almost in, well, next school year, he'll be in seminary. How do you help my kids, how do you help other people's kids come to conversion? That is a huge question, right? That's what we want. Well, let me tell you a little bit more of this story. And I mean, Jacob's story of conversion isn't over, but we've seen some little blessings come. We prayed and prayed for this kid, right? Well, back when he was skeptical, we also had a family goal that we were, here, I'm going to refer to this again. I want you to picture this kid as we're going through the story. We had a family goal to share the gospel with somebody by Christmas. This was a couple years ago. And we were praying for this. We lived right by the BYU Creamery over in the Tree Streets in Provo. Missionary prospects are not abundant in a lot of ways there. And so we were just praying to have this opportunity to share the gospel. And one day a knock came at the door, and it was a salesman selling magazines. And my wife answered the door. And my wife and I are both so soft. We have the hardest time saying no to salesmen and everything. So we try to get the sign up before they come by, right? Because we'll listen to their whole pitch and then say no and feel even worse that we didn't say no at the beginning. Anyway, so she gets caught at the door with this salesman, and I see it's a salesman. I'm like, good luck. And so I go to the back room, and I can hear them talking for a long time. And after a while, I hear my wife call to me, hey, Tucker, can you bring me one of those little mini copies of the Book of Mormon? And I was like, who's selling what to who out there? Right? And so I brought her a little one, and she introduced me to this guy. His name was Daniel. And he was from the inner city somewhere in Florida. And she was just telling him about the church. And he was trying to sell a magazine that had apple pie on the front. And she said, oh, I love apple pie and ice cream. And he was like, and ice cream? What are you talking about? And she was like, you haven't had apple pie with ice cream? And she was like, are you even American? And anyway, I don't know if that's a good way to start the conversation. But anyway, and they were laughing together and everything. And then she said, I'll tell you what, if you will, well, I'll skip to the end of the conversation. If you will meet with the missionaries, we will serve you apple pie and ice cream together. And he's like, okay. And she talked to the church, or talked to him about the church a little bit by that time. And so we wanted that to happen, and his little sales group actually left town before we could arrange that, but we had his phone number. Anyway, he disappeared for a long time. And about November, she got a text from him that said, hey, Miss Katie, I'm back in town, Miss Katie, he's from the south, right? Hey, Miss Katie, I'm back in town. I'll take that apple pie and ice cream if you want to. And she said, hey, how about we meet you by Temple Square, because he was in Salt Lake, and we'll take you around Temple Square and tell you about it. And so he was like, that sounds great. So we were all excited. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and we were going to introduce him to the church and everything by taking him to Temple Square. So we got our kids in the car. We were down to Temple Square like a little bit early. Found a couple sister missionaries that we were like, we're going to bring a young man to you. We want you to teach him about the gospel, you know. And we were so excited. So we show up there. We got it all set up and waited for the time for him and he was going to bring a friend of his to Temple Square as well. And he was not showing up. We kept watching clock, and time was going on. It was getting later and later. Our kids were getting tired and restless and grumpy. It hit almost 9 o'clock, and this guy had not shown up. We get back in our car, sitting outside of Temple Square, and regrettably, I had a really grumpy moment, and I was like, hon, this is just like the mission. Right? I was like, you set everything up so perfectly. You've got it, and you just know it's going to be the most amazing spiritual experience. And then everything falls through, and it is so frustrating. And I was home bitter, and my son Cameron, from behind me, he's like, we should say a prayer that they show up. Why don't you say it? You know, I'm like trying to not be bitter, because I know I am, and I know it's not helpful. Cameron, why don't you go ahead and say the prayer? So, you guys, it was the sweetest. He's 9, and he says the most faithful prayer you've ever heard. It was like, Heavenly Father, we want to teach the gospel to these guys. Can you bless them that they can come to Temple Square so we can tell them about the church? In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And I'm just like, oh, come on, dude. Did thou hear that, right? And within now Jacob's sitting behind Cameron in the van, right? He's kind of the half Mormon kid. It's not in the church completely, according to him as a 7-year-old. And he's listening to all of this. And Cameron ends his prayer. Cameron says it was probably about 5 seconds. About 5 seconds later, Katie's phone rings. And she picks it up, and she's like, oh, hi, Daniel. Yeah, where are you? And he's like, I'm sorry, Miss Katie, my phone was died. The battery was dead. I couldn't get it working again. Now it just turned back on. Can I still come? And she's like, yeah, come on down, come on down. We hurried over to the people that were closing the gates to Temple Square. It was like the last second, right? And we were like, hey, we want to bring some people through, show them Temple Square. Can you leave it open for a second? And they're like, okay. And so we get the kids out of the car, and Daniel and his friend come running to Temple Square, and we take them into Temple Square, show them around. We went over to the Joseph Smith building. Katie brings out her apple pie. We had ice cream and apple pie. And I turned to my 9-year-old son, Cameron, and said, Cameron, can you tell these guys about Joseph Smith? And one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard is a 9-year-old teaching these 2 guys from inner city, somewhere in Florida, about Joseph Smith's first vision. And the spirit was so sweet there. And we come out, we tell them about the temple and eternal families and all of this. And it was the most beautiful spiritual experience. And we get back in the car. And as we're sitting in the car, I say to my wife, okay, that's what missions are like. Everything falls through, and you're like, this is so frustrating. And then a miracle happens, and it is the most amazing thing that heaven takes over. And there's one really important part of this story that I left out. So, in all of that, Cameron had just said the prayer. I can't believe I missed this detail. Cameron had just said the prayer. The phone rang 5 seconds later. We all arranged it. Katie hangs up the phone, says they're coming, and Jacob in the back seat says, I'm a full Mormon. What? And yeah, so I saw that we said a prayer and the answer came, and I'm a full Mormon. That is great news. Man, that was easy. But for Jacob, all he needed was to see that there was some connection to heaven here, something here. And, okay, question. Is Jacob fully converted? now? No, he's got a good evidence, right? He's got some assurance, right? And he's on the right track. But it wasn't enough, right? He did declare himself full Mormon, but after that, questions came back, right? He kept having more questions, and he'd ask us things and ask us things. He was working his way through the Book of Mormon. He was trying to read it before he got baptized. And when he got to Moroni 7, one of his questions was, you know, what I said earlier, maybe Satan's the one behind this church or whatever, telling us to do all this good stuff. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, maybe Satan's behind it somehow. And he was reading Moroni 7, and he reads those verses that says the Spirit. Oh, let's go there. Moroni 7. I never want to quote scripture inaccurately. Yeah, this is a little 7-year-old reading Moroni 7, and there's so much in here. Right? But when he gets to 16, he says, "For behold, the Spirit of Christ is given to every man that he may know good from evil. Wherefore I show unto you the way to judge. For everything which inviteth to do good and to persuade to believe in Christ is sent forth by the power and gift of Christ. Wherefore you may know with the perfect knowledge it is of God. But whatsoever thing persuadeth men to do evil and believe not in Christ and deny him and serve not God, then you may know with the perfect knowledge it is of the devil." And my little 7-year-old Jacob comes out to us and he's like, "Hey, Mom, Dad, the church is right." We're like, "Yeah, we know." Yeah. "Yeah, what did you read?" And he's like, "Well," and in his little 7-year-old mind, everything made sense. He was like, "Well, the Spirit, like, the church teaches us to do good, and the devil doesn't do that. And so the church can't be from the devil." Right? And it was this beautiful, simple little truth that in the language of a 7-year-old, he distilled out of Moroni 7. And Jacob hasn't had negative questions since then. I don't know that, you know, every piece is, of course, not every piece is filled in. But Jacob has started in the conversion process. And it's so beautiful at that age, right? Questions are going to come. I mean, I'm not saying it's over for this kid. For sure it's not. He's not even a teenager yet. But it is so, I think some of the most beautiful things you will ever see on this planet is little pieces of the testimony puzzle filled in for people. And you and I get to witness that as teachers in a classroom. When that little piece to the puzzle comes to one of them. Now here's the question that I want to consider with you today. How do we facilitate those pieces being filled in our classrooms? We can probably talk a lot about how not to do that. But let's find out how to do it. And can we go to another family? A little bit like the story I just told. But let's just go back to 1 Nephi and Lehi and his family. And let's watch how it happens among his family. And maybe look at these chapters of the Book of Mormon in a little bit different way than you looked at them before. Let's start in 1 Nephi chapter 2. So first of all, Lehi gets his own fire, his own testimony. He's full of the fire, right? And then in 1 Nephi chapter 2, we've got, let's see if the rest of the family jumps on board with this. In fact, let's do this. Let's start in verse 2. I will read. Every time we hit a pronoun, will you say it out loud with me? You know what I mean by a pronoun or a possessive pronoun. So he, she, I, we, us, or my. It can be the possessive ones or our, right? Anytime we hit one of those, would you just say it out loud when we get there? Okay? We're going to start in verse 2 of chapter 2. And it came to pass that the Lord commanded my father, even in a dream, that he should take his family and depart into the wilderness. And it came to pass that he was obedient unto the word of the Lord. Wherefore he did as the Lord commanded him. And it came to pass that he departed into the wilderness. And he left his house and the land of his inheritance and his gold and his silver and his precious things, and took nothing with him, save it were his and provision. This is hard. And departed into the wilderness. And he came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea. And he traveled in the wilderness in the borders which are near the Red Sea. And he did travel in the wilderness with his family, which consisted of my mother, Sarai, steamrolled that one. Which consisted of my mother, Sarai, and my other brothers who were Laman, Lemuel, and Sam. I don't know if this is distracting you too much from what's actually going on. Are you seeing a pattern? Let's keep going. You'll pick up on it for sure in the next 2 verses. And it came to pass that when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in a valley by the side of the river of water. Who is Nephi telling a story about?
His father.
Who is noticeably not mentioned?
His brothers.
Nephi. His brothers. Sariah. Where's everybody else? Let's read verse 6 again. Don't fill in the blanks. It came to pass that when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in a valley by the side of the river. Where is the rest of the family? Is this Lehi by himself? No, but for some reason, Nephi tells it this way. He had a vision. God told him to leave his things, and he did leave his things, and he pitches his tent. Well, maybe he is pitching the tent all by himself. Verse 7. And it came to pass that he built an altar of stones and made an offering unto the Lord and gave thanks unto the Lord our God. So, what's going on here? How many in the family are converted? Lehi. There's one person in this family that has just left into the wilderness. You can picture them putting up the tent. Well, not them. It's him, right? They go out into the wilderness, and Lehi is like, this is so great. The Lord is leading us out in the wilderness. We've traveled for 3 days in this sandy, dusty, awful situation. Let's put up the tent, everybody, right? He put up the tent, right? Where's everybody else, including Nephi? And in verse 7, who built the altar of stones? He did. These pronouns are revealing something interesting to me. We've got one convert into this family. Sometimes we read in this story, oh, Nephi, he was always this powerful convert, right? He was always on fire, always willing. Nephi is noticeably absent right now, right? Will you open up to your Gospel Teaching and Learning Handbook? We'll come back to this story here and read what happens to expand that circle of converts in the family. But let's go to the Gospel Teaching and Learning 1.3.3, which is page 6. Under the heading, we help students fulfill their role in the learning process and prepare them to teach the gospel to others. First sentence underneath there. Thanks, man.
Gospel learning that fosters conversion and helps the gospel sink deep into the hearts of students requires more than diligent effort on part of the teacher.
Okay. That's a really profound statement right there. If it's going to sink deep into the hearts of the students, it's got to come from somewhere other than just a diligent teacher. A diligent teacher is not enough. Okay, in Lehi's family, where are we? How many people in his family have had the gospel sink deep into their hearts at this point? One, right? Is he being diligent? Oh yeah, he's building an altar, he's setting up a tent, he's left all of his things. He's being super diligent. But gospel learning that fosters conversion and helps the gospel sink deep into the hearts of the students requires more than diligent effort on the part of Lehi, or the teacher, right? So there's more that's got to happen in this story, right? Let's pick up this story where we left off. We left off in verse 7, right? Lehi's trying to teach. He's exhorting his family. In fact, he starts naming things after Laman and Lemuel, right? What does he name after Laman? The river. He's like, this is flowing into righteousness like you, Laman. Oh, that you were like this river. And he names the valley after Lemuel. And oh, that you could be immovable like this valley, Lemuel. And he's trying to inspire. He's trying to teach. He's diligent. He's doing everything he can. And something's not working. Verse 12, and thus Laman and Lemuel, being the elders, did murmur against their father. And they did murmur because they knew not the dealings of that God who had created them, right? There's still just one convert. Even though he's teaching diligently, something is missing. And so we get that down in verse 15, that famous phrase, or that famous sentence, and my father dwelt in a tent. Noticeably absent is everybody else in the family. Interesting, isn't it? This is a one-man show right now with everybody else observing, it seems. Everything changes in the next verse. The entire path of the Book of Mormon changes in the next verse, right? Cole, would you read verse 16 for us? Watch for the pronoun changes.
And it came to pass that I, Nephi, being exceedingly young, nevertheless being large in stature, and also having great desires to know the mysteries of God, wherefore I did cry unto the Lord. And behold, he did visit me, and did soften my heart that I did believe all the words which had been spoken by my father. Wherefore I did not rebel against him like unto my brothers.
Isn't that beautiful? There's so much truth seeping out of that verse right there. If you were going to distill that truth that's in verse 16 down to a simple statement and principle, how would you say it? There's not just one. What do we learn from verse 16? Please, go ahead.
If we ask the Lord to soften our hearts.
Beautiful. If we ask. Notice that that implies something about Nephi's heart. What does it imply? Yeah, it needed softening, right? We always read this Nephi, this later Nephi, into the earlier passages, right? Nephi doesn't seem to be telling that story. He wasn't the one putting up the tent or helping with the altar, right? But the Lord softened his heart. Jacob?
I was going to say also, when we have the Spirit, we stop rebelling against the gospel, against the commandments.
Isn't that true? Haven't we all felt that when you're so full of the Spirit that you start saying things to yourself like, I'm never sinning again. Right? From now on, I will never go back to wherever we're at in life. We see ourselves, we see a new future, and we're like, there's no rebellion in us. Say that again, that principle.
When we have the Spirit with us, we stop rebelling against the gospel.
Yeah. Is that something that teenagers might be able to need in their lives? Yeah, those moments. Yes, please, Hannah.
I think also how much it stems from desires, because you see the difference between Laman and Lemuel, that they just thought, our dad's dumb, this is dumb, everything is dumb, I don't want to do this, as opposed to Nephi who thinks, okay, this is dumb, but I want to know why we're here, I want to know what my father is talking about. And so I think that desire is a really important defining factor in Nephi, that
Beautiful.
he has a pure desire.
So how do we help? So it does start with desire, right? So if you have students in your class that do not desire conversion, that do not want to be converted, how do we help somebody want to be converted that doesn't even want, doesn't have any desire for it? Please.
I think this is where it comes to understanding where students at and that urgency and how it's applicable to them. So doing everything that we can to teach the gospel in a way that it applies to them now in their lives, and that they can see the ways that if they implement this principle that we teach today, or at least try it, that it's going to, that it applies to them in that moment.
So true. What Brother Hunt was talking about before with relevancy, right? We've got to make it simple enough so they see the promise. They see, if you try this, if you... we don't know when Nephi got this message, right? But Nephi had a message or a principle presented to him that's implied in verse 16. What did Nephi believe that caused him to do what he did in verse 16? He's like, hey, if I pray and cry unto the Lord, then he can help me, he can visit me, he can soften me, right? Maybe from watching his dad, maybe his dad specifically said that, right? But if we can make that relevant and stick those out there and allow the students to act, things can change, right? Yeah, Andrew.
I just think relevance to us as teachers. I like in verse 17, right at the end, and it came to pass to believe in my words. He's talking to Sam. And I think Sam's, an easier classmate than, say, Laman and Lemuel, but I still think that's like the importance of letting students testify, because I can testify and I can give the apostles, but somehow to a teenager it's way more relevant when it's like their peer, another high school kid who's not, already served a mission and has a wife and kids. It's like all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, this is relevant. Like Nephi went and prayed and had this experience. Like, I bet I could too, and I feel like Sam has that experience by listening to Nephi's
Thank you so
testimony.
much. Thank you for bringing that up. Can I share an aha moment that you just reminded me of? When I was asked to be a seminary principal and I started sitting in the back of seminary classes and observing them, I had this big aha moment that for you, you're going to be like, duh, I already knew that, Brother Boyle. But for me, I felt like the most powerful moments in my lessons as a teacher were when I was bearing testimony. I would just feel the Spirit speaking through me. I would feel just this power when I shared an experience and bore a testimony of it. When I sat in the back of classes, the aha moment was the most powerful moments in a classroom don't come from the teacher. They come from the students, right? It's when, a teacher bears testimony, shares an experience, but when a student raises their hand and bears testimony and shares an experience, all of a sudden you'll see other student heads like start to nod. And even if the teacher's up there feeling like, hey, my story was way better than that story. Right? There's something student to student. There's something about Nephi to Sam that is more powerful oftentimes than Lehi to Sam. Maybe you've noticed this. Parents sometimes have the hardest time getting through to their kids than anybody in the world, right? Because of sometimes those walls that are there. But peers or siblings can have huge influence on each other. Please, go ahead.
I'm not trying to distract from the insight you just gave, because I think that's so important as the student to see.
Okay, then don't. Let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. No, go ahead. I want to hear what you got to say.
But no, just, kind of, I just can't get over the fact that, talking about how, we talk about how this requires more than diligent effort on part of the teacher to help these kids have these kind of spiritual experiences. I just can't get over the fact that, how do we help kids have a desire? I think it all starts with noticing a peculiarity or a disconnect between what they think they know and what is actually there. And that causes the question, right? So obviously Nephi is watching very closely his father, like we see with the pronouns. He's watching his father, everything that he does, he's watching. And there's this peculiarity about he's watching. He says something is different, right? And so I think that we as teachers not only need to create a peculiarity in the lives of the student, in that they look at the teacher and they're like, something is different. Something that I think that I'm seeing in my other peers, or I'm seeing in my own family, right? Something's not adding up here. My parents tell me this, but they're living something contradictory, or my peers are telling me this and they're living something contradictory, but when the teacher is teaching, something is different. And so that creates peculiar, and then it's no surprise to me that of all the principles that Nephi would have a testimony over, that he was like, I'm going to pray. Everything that has happened up to that point all happened when his father sat down and prayed over Jerusalem, and the city is consumed by fire, right, in the vision that he sees. And in the language that he uses in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, for behold, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto my father, even in a dream. By Lehi's example, that is the pattern that he has set, was everything changed for my family right when my father had a prayer. There may be something more to this prayer stuff than I had been thinking about up until this point. It all started with that. That's the pattern that Lehi set by his example. So I think that there's got to be, that puts the attention on us as the teachers to create that peculiarity by the way we live, in our outside life. They have to see something, because up to this point it's a principle. It's a precept that could or could not be true, and all the pressures put on them to live it if they want to or not. Whereas now they're seeing a live illustration. They're seeing that principle in action right in front of them. And they're like, okay, everything that has been true, or what I thought was true at this point, it's not adding up. Right?
So there needs to be a little cognitive dissonance that says the path of my life, if I continue on this path, has less promise than a path that I'm seeing in the scriptures or a path I'm seeing in the life of the teacher. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah.
With the question of how do we help somebody who doesn't have a desire to be converted, there's a talk that I always come back to with that one. It's from Elder Richard G. Scott. I've given it to you an example. And that one's just an incredible talk. And he talks about times in his life where he didn't want to be converted to a certain principle or didn't want to do certain things. But it was because of the love that he felt from other good people that he decided to make changes. And it was when he felt loved by them that he thought, you know what, I should make this change. I should become this. So I think as teachers, our students need to know that we need that.
Such a profound principle. How many of you can think of a teacher in your past that had a great influence on the path of your life that also you could just tell loved you? Raise your hands, that's true. And I could have asked that differently. How many of you can think of a teacher in your past in your life that made a great impact on you that didn't love you? And there will be some. There's some exceptions to that, right? Because it was the truth. It was what they taught that made the difference. But teenagers usually are in a vulnerable, insecure state. I know I was as a teenager, so that when I sensed love from a teacher, all of a sudden the power to influence me skyrocketed. In fact, you'll hear teenagers talk like this sometimes. When they're talking about their grades or something, they'll say something like that. Oh, that teacher gave me a C. He hates me. Like, it's always followed up by how that teacher feels about that. And it's so fascinating to me. Like, the grade doesn't have anything to do with, like, them not turning their homework or anything like that. It's like a projection of the teacher's feelings toward them. And it's so interesting that in a teenager's mind, and they're, we're insecure at that stage in life. We find our security, we open our hearts where we feel, hey, that person loves me. I'm secure in their presence, and so I'm going to open up and learn that. Hannah?
Yeah, I think, because I have a question kind of like along those lines, and just to preface it, like, so I have a younger brother, he's 18, we're on a mission next month, and it's really awesome, but we have like a really special relationship, and he has been coming to me a lot with a lot of questions, like temple questions and mission questions and all of this stuff, and I know that we have, and like he won't talk to my parents about it, but he'll talk to me about it, and I know that we've like developed this relationship over my 22 years of being alive. I've been working on this 18-year-old boy so that he'll trust me. And so, but I want, because just as I've been thinking about like my students, I want them to feel like my brother feels, like they can open up, they can have their questions and things like that. But I guess my question is, how do you, number one, get your students to trust you in class so that they are sharing these experiences, and when you're sitting in front of a class of 30 kids, have them all feel like you love them? I don't know, just what are some best ways to do that?
Such a great question.
Can I share something while you're...
Please, Chris.
Because I had a thought as we were reading a little bit earlier about that. It says, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, in verse 15, being exceedingly young, nevertheless being large in stature, and also having great desires to know this regard. I've always wondered why Nephi's always talking about his stature.
By the way, I'm huge. Anyway.
Well, I think the point is that he's comfortable with himself.
Yeah.
And if we as teachers are even subconsciously implying to the students that you're not good enough right now, we need them to feel comfortable with who they are. Otherwise, the desires won't matter. They won't act because they don't trust their desires.
Great.
And they won't act.
You need to feel loved where they're at, right? Let's keep reading in that verse. Wherefore I did cry unto the Lord, and behold, he did visit me and did soften my heart, that I did believe all the words which had been spoken by my father. Wherefore I did not rebel. So is this the effect of Lehi on Nephi? I mean, Lehi's effect opens him up to connect to the Lord, right? Ultimately, it is not going to be us as teachers that change anybody, right? But what teachers can do is kind of what Matthew said earlier. We can open up a possibility of a path that they can take themselves to connect to the Lord, right? That's our role. And we can love them to help them open up to the possibilities that can happen, and they can go down the road that we've traveled already, right? Can we follow this through a little bit more, this story? We'll go really quick. Go chapter 3. You know chapter 3, but look at it through this kind of new perspective. Lehi has another dream, right? And he calls Nephi in and says, hey, you're supposed to go back to Jerusalem. And what is he expecting out of Nephi? Verse 6, therefore go, my son, and thou shalt be favored of the Lord, because thou hast not murmured. Okay, so Lehi knows that Nephi's not a murmurer, right? And knows that he'll do what he's asked to do. But does he know that Nephi's on his team? Does he know that he's converted? Not until verse 7. In verse 6, you see, okay, Nephi didn't murmur. He's out in the wilderness. He's not doing what Laman and Lemuel are doing. But until verse 7, Lehi doesn't know that he's not the only one on this team, right? And it came to pass that I, Nephi, said unto my father, I will go and do the things which the Lord has commanded, for I know. Those verses must have just made Lehi cry for joy. I don't know of any greater happiness for a parent than hearing a student testify of the truthfulness of the gospel, because for I know, I've learned it for myself, right? Even those little tiny experiences with Jacob, just, I just love Heavenly Father for working with my kids like that, right? So he's got his own testimony. Let's keep going. By the way, let's stop here for a second. Why does God ask Lehi to send his sons back to Jerusalem and get the plates? Why didn't he have Lehi go over to Laban's house and get the plates before that? Look at this whole plan that the Lord, and think of it in this context. The Lord's plan is not just to get them out of Jerusalem. The Lord's plan is to get them out of Jerusalem with a family full of testimonies and fire of the Spirit, right? He doesn't need to just get a family. He needs to get testimonies and fire and start a civilization that is burning with testimonies. Why does he ask Nephi to go back to Jerusalem? That was a totally leading question. You were raising your hand, Lucy.
I mean, you kind of said it for us, right?
Sorry.
Right? I mean, they had to go back to be able to gain those testimonies. Like, Lehi, he's solid. He knows what's right. He went, did exactly what we just did. We looked at all the things that Lehi did. But Laman and Lemuel and even Nephi still, like, they're growing their testimonies and learning. And through that experience, trial of fire, like, they're able to go through and be like, okay, this didn't work. Let's see if we have the faith to go back again. No, this didn't work. Let's see if we have the faith to go back again. Are we willing to do these things? And just kind of see how the Lord works. We talked a little bit in our group earlier about how borrowing, I think Josh mentioned, like borrowing the light of others, and sometimes it's kind of frowned upon, like everyone needs their own light and their own testimony. But there's also blessings and benefits that come from the light of others, and how Lehi kind of started that for him, and like, hey, here's my light, Nephi starting it, and it's kind of trickling down to the family to start an entire civilization. You can't do that unless you're grounded in the gospel.
Beautiful. So well said. And so, how does the Lord, you said that so well, I'm not going to remember exactly the phrase you used. How does the Lord get them to have testimony? How does the Lord invite other people in Lehi's family to find out for themselves? He gives them experiences, right? The Lord purposely didn't get the brass plates and will send them with him. He provided an opportunity for Nephi's family to act, and Nephi and his brothers to act, right? That's what God does to convert us. He provides us with opportunities to act. That is absolutely fundamental to helping people become converted to the gospel. They have to have opportunities to act. As gospel teachers, that has some implications for us. What are the implications? Andrew, what do you see?
I think especially students that are like Laman and Lemuel, I didn't just say, well, I'm going to send Nephi and Sam back because they'll do it without questioning me, right? He sends all four of them back. Even though I think he probably knew, like, oh, Laman's going to hate this, and Leman's going to hate this, right? I think there are some activities that we do as teachers where you're like, all right, I'm going to do this. This student's going to hate it, but he's going to do it. And for some reason, I don't know if they're going to hate the whole thing, or maybe they'll learn to love it, or like, I don't know, but you can't, like, I don't know how to say it, like, you just can't give up on them, right? You got to make them, like, push them a little bit. Get out of your comfort zone a little bit, like, try this. Hopefully something good will come of it, but, you know, maybe not.
Yeah, but testimonies come when we're acting,
Yeah.
right? And so if we don't give the students opportunities to act, we are taking away opportunities to gain testimonies. Do we understand how hugely fundamental that is to gospel teaching and learning? if we aren't giving our students opportunities to act, we aren't giving them opportunities to gain testimony. Yeah, they've got to exercise their agency, right? Can we go back to the gospel? I want to get to your comments. Can we go back and have Elder Bednar drive this home for us in the gospel teaching and learning? I think we stopped after one sentence, didn't we?
Yeah.
So Elder Eyring and Elder Bednar are going to drive this home so beautifully. We're in that first paragraph on page 6, 1.3.3, third paragraph from the bottom, fourth from the bottom. Second sentence, spiritual learning. Watch for what the apostles are going to teach us about how spiritual learning has got to work in our classrooms. Reader, let's see where we're at. Thanks, Chris.
So, spiritual learning requires effort and the exercise of agency by the learner. Elder Henry V. Eyring taught, quote, true conversion depends on a student seeking freely in faith with great effort.
Okay, let's pause for a second. Let that one sink in. There's so many elements in there. True conversion, they have to seek freely in faith with great effort. Is it a temptation to make it too easy as a teacher for students in our classes sometimes? Yes. I know it is for me. Sometimes, I'll hit them with this story, and then we'll watch this Mormon message, and it'll just be so inspiring that they'll walk out inspired, and there was no opportunity for them. What were they, if I just told this story and we watched a video, what actions were they performing? Listening and watching, right? They're being acted upon. And they can. We're not like taking away all their agency. Those have their place, right? But the more we can give them opportunities to act, the more potential there is for testimony to be formed, right? Let's, Sergio.
I have a question, actually.
Please.
So, action being the thing that drives conversion, right?
Right.
So here's my question. What about the attitude? Because Laman and Lemuel journeyed into the wilderness with their father. They did the same action Nephi did.
Right.
They went back for the plates. They endured multiple attempts for the plates. They came back, they journeyed into the wilderness, took daughters of Ishmael, they built the boat. They did all the same actions. So even though they had the opportunity for the actions, and in many cases performed the actions, what if we have a student whose attitude, regardless of whatever action they take, just will not allow them to be converted? How do we fix that? How can we try to fix that?
Such a great question. Because it's obviously not action alone equals conversion, right? It's obviously not that. There's another element that's missing here. By the way, did Laman and Lemuel ever have converting experiences?
Yes.
They could have
well,
been potentially converting.
Did they ever have experiences where they had testimony building experiences?
Yes.
Yeah. And it changed. Can we look at a couple really quick? Look, they're acting, they're, like you say, Sergio, they're out in the wilderness and everything. Let's go to 1 Nephi 16. So they're still in the valley of Lemuel in 1 Nephi 16, right? 1 Nephi 16. They're still in the valley of Lemuel. No, let's go to 15. Sorry. And verse 20. So remember, okay. Earlier than verse 20. Can we just read the whole book of 1 Nephi? It's so good. Well, let's go like this. Verse 7. And they said, behold, we cannot understand the words which our father hath spoken concerning the natural branch of the olive tree and also concerning the Gentiles. Nephi has just come out of his visionary experience where he sees the interpretation, right? And what does Nephi say to him in verse 8? And I said unto them, have ye inquired of the Lord? And they said unto me, we have not, for the Lord maketh no such thing known unto us. Can you hear their attitude in that verse right there? What Sergio points out. There is an attitude that is keeping them, even though they're walking through the wilderness, even though they're going through the motions. But keep reading. Behold, I said unto them, how is it that ye do not keep the commandments of the Lord? How is it that ye will perish? Wait a second. He just said they're not keeping the commandments of the Lord. Yeah, they are. They left Jerusalem, and they're doing everything that he's telling them to do. Why does Nephi say they're not keeping the commandments of the Lord? What do you mean?
No, like I disagree. Like they're not doing the same thing as like I am. Yes, a lot of it's the attitude, but I can go to church because I'm told that I need to go to my 3 hours of meetings. But if I'm just there and I'm on my phone and I'm on Facebook and I'm watching Netflix, and am I really at church? No, I'm not, you know? And so they weren't like, what they were doing because they weren't forced, really. Because they weren't forced, but like, hey, go. They didn't want to go. And I was kind of saying like, hey, let's do this. And he was trying to be that leader. But it's a higher law, right? And, I don't know.
Maybe this has relevance in our day today. Were Laman and Lemuel really present in the wilderness? You know what I mean by the word present? Like, were their hearts in the wilderness? Where were their hearts? In Jerusalem. There are times where their hearts come out of Jerusalem for a little bit, right? Like over here in verse 20. Look at verse 20. And I did rehearse unto them in the words of Isaiah, who spake concerning the restoration of the Jews, or of the house of Israel. And after they were restored, they should no more be confounded, neither should they be scattered again. And it came to pass that I did speak many words unto my brethren, that they were pacified, and they did humble themselves before the Lord. And then over in chapter 16, verse 5. And it came to pass that they did humble themselves before the Lord, insomuch that I had joy and great hopes of them, that they would walk in the paths of righteousness. They're having these moments, right, where they're humbling themselves before the Lord and repenting to a degree, right? And so they're having these little experiences, but something's keeping them from the big experience. Sierra?
I think we can combine both action and desire, I guess, to boil it down to will, you know, because so I'm an advertising major, and we talk about how do we get these kids to see that not only do they need this, they want it, because they do, they just don't know it, right? And from an advertising perspective, you take a consumer, you do research on the consumer, you figure out how to convey a message to them that will get them to act. And they can act all you want, but you want to get them from being just a consumer of that product to a product advocate, to where they will tell others about that product. And they say, this is the greatest cleaning product, you should buy it, it works, I've done it. And so when you talk about that kind of mentality of how to get them from point A to point B, and a lot of it is you show them the need that they have for that product. You show them, look, you need this, and God does that with Laman and Lemuel by striking them with the power of an angel, and giving Nephi the power to strike them down. And he keeps telling them, like, you need to obey, but they need to make that connection of, I want to obey. That's where their will comes in to play, I guess, their actions. They're not just doing it to do it, they're doing it because they say they want to. And we kind of walk them through that by showing them, yes, you need this, and this is why, but then at some point, the Spirit mixed with our teaching, mixed with their desire and their choices as a free agent, combined to create this will to act. And that changes everything.
Great explanation. Reminds me of what Hannah said in that last class when you had that investigator that they saw, oh, I need this, I want what Alma had, right? And then when they see that and they start to act, they'll get what Alma got, right? Please.
This is just kind of a learning experience for me. Like, I liked how you pointed out how Nephi asked them, like, have you prayed? Like, did you ask for the Lord? I was in the same meeting as Grant yesterday where he had that revelatory experience where he prayed, and I was sitting next to him, but I fell asleep, and I can't tell you a single thing any of those people said last night. And so it's kind of like, for me, like, I was there, but I didn't ask of the Lord, and like I wasn't inquiring. I don't feel like I went with like wicked intentions or anything like that, but I didn't put in all of my effort, and I wasn't like doing that last little simple thing. I think just asking God, like, hey, I need some help, like, to pay attention and to learn something.
So, your body was present, right?
Yeah.
You guys, you will wrestle with this over and over and over again as a seminary teacher. How do we invite and encourage our students to be present while they're with us so that, you know, their mind isn't in their phone, wandering somewhere? We've all been in a class where our bodies were there, but like you just described, right? Our hearts and minds weren't there. As teachers, we need to invite them to act, which will invite them to be more present so that the Spirit can work on them, soften their hearts, and work more conversion on them, right? Josh?
I was just going to mention right before this, you were talking about how effective it's been for some of us to just not even ask for any volunteers, but to always call on a certain student. Call on a student specifically, and that gets them to act. And some of them don't like it, but it's very effective in getting everybody participating. And I've had experiences where I've called on someone who I didn't get the say, they were maybe might not have been paying attention, but then in asking them the question, they opened up some stuff that they were thinking about and began participating more.
Yeah, especially when we're guided by the Spirit and love to call on them to act, right? We'll know our students. As you get to know your students, you'll know which ones, if I call on them in public, it will embarrass them and actually cause negative momentum. And that student that's like, hey, they're with us, they're engaged, they have something to offer, right? And we can discern the difference between those things as we teach and are guided by the Spirit, right? Can I show you a couple other things? As they keep going, oh wait, we gotta go back here. We gotta go back to Elder Bednar. Only Elder Irene has taught us. Elder Bednar, Chris, can you pick it up where we left off?
Yes, so we finished the quote from Elder President Iron, that Elder
Yes.
David A. Bednar emphasized that the effort put forth by students invites the influence of the Holy Ghost into their lives. Quote, a teacher can explain, demonstrate, persuade, and testify, and do so with great spiritual power and effectiveness. Ultimately, however, the content of the message and the witness of the Holy Ghost penetrate into the heart only if a receiver allows them to enter. A learner exercising agency by acting in accordance with correct principles opens his or her heart to the Holy Ghost and invites his teaching, testifying power, and confirming witness.
A learner exercising agency by acting in accordance with correct principles opens his or her heart to the Holy Ghost. There's so many different ways as teachers that we can invite learners to act and open their hearts to the Holy Ghost. I'm going to give you 3 minutes because right in here, you've got one paragraph and then you've got that bullet list below it of a bunch of different ways that we can encourage students to actively act in our classes. Would you just scan that, like go through that list and circle and mark those things that are actions that we can invite our students to perform that will help with their conversion? Just do it on your own. Would you look at that list by the bullet points right there? Think of, as you read through that, I want you to think of a converting experience that you've had from your own experience that's attached to one of those actions. I'm just going to ask you to, in your tables, just share one of those. What was the action and what was the converting experience that came from performing that action? It doesn't have to be huge. It can be something really small. one that came to mind as I was reading through that is I'm on a mission in Brazil in a little tiny town called Piripiri. And we went up and we were just tracking. We met this guy that looked like he was a Harley motorcycle rider right in the middle of Brazil. It was kind of different. But as we sat down and started teaching him about Joseph Smith in the first vision, I remember seeing this man that just intimidated me physically, right? Which I'm very easily intimidated. I sat down and I started to tell Joseph Smith's experience in the Grove and bear my testimony, and I saw this large man start to get tears coming in his eyes and soften, and I started to see him very differently than the way I had seen him before I started to bear my testimony. And it was a converting experience for me as I bore testimony of Joseph Smith. And the action was I opened my mouth and I bore my testimony in an intimidating experience for me, and the Spirit confirmed that Joseph Smith was a prophet again to me in that situation. Would you just share in your tables? And let's see, Joseph, would you join those in back of you? And then Andrea, join those in back of you. And then just share in your tables. What was the action and what was the converting experience that came from taking that action? Go ahead.
So, for me,
Maybe take 7 minutes.
as I'm doing that, especially more recently, I felt like I noticed the difference. And I realized that it's been happening my whole life as I've been through that. As I do this daily, I can feel it. I can feel the difference.
Is it a little island or? Yeah, it's
Sorry, Mom. Causes like global chaos.
If we can finish up in 2 minutes, is that what that's not where they're at. 2 minutes? That's not where they're at.
That's the hardest part for me. No, it's not. It's called like.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, exactly.
Two of them were like men. You got rid of
11.
We'll just make you a playlist.
Okay, try to finish up in 10 seconds. Wrap it up. All right, thank you so much. It's pretty easy once you start thinking of converting experiences in your life to just back up to right before it and be like, oh, I was acting. I did something right before that, right? Did you see those connections as you heard and shared those stories? There is a connection between acting, taking a step toward God, and He always takes several toward us to give us evidence that our faith is worthwhile and He'll lead us that way. Now, are all actions that we do in a classroom of the same, do they all contain the same converting potential? No. That is a totally obvious question. Thank you very much. No, they don't, right? Give me some lower level actions that we perform in the classroom that are good, helpful, but that don't have the converting power of maybe higher level actions. Just go ahead and say them out. Taking a roll. Taking a roll. It's powerful. Okay. But that our students are doing as well. What else? Just say the actions out. Just go ahead. Say them out. Singing hymns can invite the Spirit. Good. And that's a great place to start every day. What else? Yeah.
So, at least in my experience, sometimes when the students are sharing their spiritual thought, it tends to be kind of goofy, or they kind of blow it off, where they're just there to kind of like make a funny Star Wars reference in front of the class.
Right.
And so I think they just kind of see us going through the motions, and they don't take the time to realize that it really does start the class off fun and good.
Right. And so that action is kind of, when the action is half-hearted, the result totally equals it, right? There's an eternal principle out there. So I had my brother-in-law was really struggling through his teenage years with his testimony. His parents got divorced, so my in-laws got divorced, and he was bouncing back and forth between them, like just really having a hard time. And we invited him over for dinner one time. After dinner, I just asked him, Daniel, this is not the same Daniel that was a salesman. Anyway, Daniel.
I would have been great into that story.
Anyway, so, poor family. So, Daniel, my brother-in-law, is 15 or 16 at the time, I said, Daniel, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is your testimony? And he said, 0. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much effort are you putting into it? 0. And it was really easy to draw the connection after that, right? I said, yeah, that's how it works, Daniel. If you want to grow in your testimony, there's got to be action, right? You have to act. And not that he started right then, but he did start to act. Slowly, ended up going on a mission, right, in the temple. But it just comes from these small actions. So lower level actions, we'll take those. If somebody is at a 0, we will take a 1, right? So if there's somebody in your class, and you can sense from their spiritual tank there's no gas in there, we don't ask them to stand up and bear their testimony in front of the class, right, and expose that. But we can ask them to act. What are some of the other lower level actions that will help them start to gain spiritual momentum? Yes?
Well, like this is super lower level. I don't know if it like helps them gain, I don't know. I sometimes like to involve people by asking them to be a scribe or to like stand up and act something out, or like it's not way converting, but they get to participate in how to call it.
Exactly, right? And as they take a step forward to participate and act, it starts to create some momentum, right? You don't get scribes up here that are just, crying, wiping their tears, like, I wrote that so well, or whatever. That's not the converting, but it creates an atmosphere in the class of action. We've got to create that culture in our classes of not the teacher standing here doing all the acting, but the students acting, right? What else? Yeah.
Having like a pen and paper to write their thoughts down, or having their scriptures open and write post-it notes.
Awesome. And you guys, the craziest thing is, these are simple little things, but some of the students don't realize that those simple little actions are doing what Elder Scott says, right? Look back at that quote. We read it during Brother Hunt's, but it's on page 7 there. It's the pop-out quote. The student's decision to participate is an exercise in agency that permits the Holy Ghost to communicate a personalized message suited to their individual needs. When they're using their agency, it invites the Holy Ghost, right? Creating an atmosphere of participation enhances the probability that the Spirit will teach more important lessons than you can communicate. That's what we want. Action, so the Spirit teaches them not us, right?
I actually have a question.
Go ahead.
So I still am bedazzled by your son's experience. So you said he was very skeptical. He was very skeptical. And you said that he was reading the Book of Mormon and he came across that scripture. Did you guys do or say something to get him to want to read the Book of Mormon in his free time to get that answer? Because my experience is that when a child doesn't feel the relevance here is very skeptical, they end up not doing the action at all. So that's the thing is like, what was it that happened that caused him, do you think, to read?
It's a good question. We believe strongly in physical force. No, it wasn't physical force. It was more the influence of his older brother that had read the Book of Mormon by the time he got baptized. And so it kind of was a Nephi to Sam a little bit, right? Where we were like, hey, your baptism's coming up. You'll have to read this so much each time. And in his little 7-year-old mentality, right? we couldn't call on this grand motivation of like, you will receive a testimony from heaven if you will read the scriptures, and that didn't compute to him. But in his mind, it was, hey, I think that would be neat to finish the Book of Mormon before I get baptized and be like my brother. And the beautiful thing about God, you guys, is that he'll take our littlest efforts and like shower blessings on our littlest efforts, right? I don't think it was anything that we as parents did right. I think it was something from his older brother. But still in that, I can see that God looks for our efforts. It's like he's waiting for us to act. He's like, all right, Jacob, do something. Oh, he's in the Book of Mormon. Let's make this connection for him, right? That's the kind of God that I sense is in heaven, anxiously awaiting for us to act so that he can jump and bless us. It's a great question.
How did you get your oldest son then? Because there's the other one.
He's kind of like disturbingly obedient. We just put it out there. Wouldn't that be great to read the Book of Mormon? Oh yeah, and he would just read the Book of Mormon. Now he's read the Old Testament. He's in Luke now. I don't know. He's just one of those kids, right? It's one of those spiritual gifts I think that DNC 46 talks about, where some are just blessed to kind of believe and be obedient on their own, right? And those kids are in your classes, right? There are those kids in your classes that, hey, I read the Book of Mormon because my parents told me to, and I prayed because when I said I should, and I didn't, and I got an answer. And you lift them up. You let them act and testify. And then the other kids, the Jacobs in your class, are going to be like, okay, I'll do what he says. Not what Brother Boyle says, but I'll do what he says. Right? It's beautiful that God gives us, all these different gifts among us to help us with each other. Okay, a couple things. As you guys were sharing, I noticed, hey, we skipped parts of Nephi's story. We didn't answer Sergio's question. I spazzed out and got excited. Can we tie up a couple loose ends? Go back to 1 Nephi 15. We are just about to get to Sergio's answer from Nephi. When Laban and Lemuel are like, he says, have you inquired of the Lord? He says, how do you not keep the commandments? Verse 10. Behold, I said unto them, how is it that you do not keep the commandments of the Lord? How is it that you will perish because of the hardness of your hearts? Nephi sees there's a difference between keeping the commandments with hard hearts and keeping the commandments with a soft heart, right? Keep reading. Do you not remember the things which the Lord has said? If you will not harden your heart and ask me in faith, believing that ye shall receive with diligence in keeping my commandments, surely these things shall be made known unto you. That's what Nephi knew that got him back in 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 15, to hit his knees and pray to God. That's the essence of what we're asking of our students, right? Hey, if you don't harden your hearts and you ask God in faith, believing you'll receive keeping the commandments, he will manifest it to you too. Right? And by the way, we skipped over Sariah's story. Was Sariah all in the beginning? No. In fact, when Nephi and brothers go back to Jerusalem, what's she doing? Yeah. Do you notice that Nephi uses a different word than murmuring in there? What is the word he used? Verse 2. For she had supposed that we had perished in the wilderness, and she had also complained. This is for Nephi 5, verse 2. She had also complained against my father, right? A little softer than murmuring, right? But she's complaining about this and wondering, are my sons dead? And then in verse 7, and when we had returned to the tent of my father, behold, their joy was full. My mother was comforted, and she spake, saying, now I know of a surety. Isn't that awesome? I just love these testimony lines from Nephi's family. Now I know. Nephi, back in 3 Nephi 7. Now I know. Right? Sam knows from Nephi. God is working with this family from so many angles.
I think that's my favorite thing, too. It's just like how all the different experiences are totally catered to people. Like surrounding like a motherly thing of like, oh, my kids will be protected even if I wasn't there. Like, I witnessed God protecting them. And like Laman and Lemuel, totally different stage of conversion, but they were A-okay to go back and get wives. And I think like God put that experience like, hey guys, I am going to take care of you. I'm going to give you things that you like too. Don't worry. And he kind of knew the experience, like going back and trying a zillion times and not working, and each time failing, until finally like, okay, I'll just follow your direction. And like they each had a situation so perfectly catered to them. It's just mind blowing.
is it one of the most profound lessons you can help the students understand is not that just God has a plan of salvation for all of us in general, but he has a plan of salvation for each of us in particular, right? And you can see that in this family. I can see this in my family. And you'll see that in your classes, that God knows your students. And so he'll send other students, he'll send experiences, he'll send ways to reach out to them. Quick experience that I just thought of that was so moving to me. I was teaching at Lake Ridge Junior High, and some morning I just read a passage in Alma about just a verse. Probably doesn't matter what the verse is, but it was talking about how the Lord reaches out to the salvation of many people in many ways. And the verse just came alive to me. And the scriptures just like opened, and I had all these connections happen. And I was so inspired that morning. Went to work, a few more days, just normal days at work. And right in the middle of a lesson one day, a student must have sensed just a really safe atmosphere because it wasn't related to the lesson at all. And she was over in this part of the room, and she raised her hand. She said, "Brother Boyle, can I ask a question that's not related to the lesson?" And I could tell that there's something behind this. And I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." She said, "What happens if somebody in your family leaves the church? Is there any hope?" And it was so tender, so safe in that moment, but so vulnerable from her. That scripture that I had read 5 days earlier, I was like, oh, that's why it came. And I went and I took her to that verse, and we read the verse, and I showed her all the other verses that had connected to it. And as we were talking about this, I just started to see these tears of comfort flow down her face. That, oh, yeah, God's got this, right? There's a plan of salvation for my family and these people that I'm worried about as well. God has this, right? And for me, I learned many lessons from that. First of all, that God knows that girl that was sitting in my class. God knew her question before she asked it. God knew that I needed to have an answer at that moment. Not that you need to have all answers for every moment, because you won't and you don't. But there will be times where you see that so vividly. That when a student has the courage to act and just ask a question, God rushes to prepare answers and to give validation to his kids when they reach out to him. He reaches back. I have a burning testimony of this principle, that as teachers we need to allow our students to act, invite them to act. If they're at a level 1 effort, give them chances to act at a level 1. And if others in your class are able to have a level 10 effort, give them chances to testify, to share experiences, and it will bring along those other students that are at a lower level. And it's so, so beautiful. So what are some of the higher level actions that we ask of students in class that have more converting power embedded into actions?
Well, you have testimony, you have to bear their testimony.
Bearing testimony definitely does. So bearing testimony, it could be just, here's the principle. Does anybody have a testimony of this? Have you learned this for yourself? Could you share that with us? It's very, very simple that way, right? Good. Yes, Matthew.
Asking, I guess whenever they take initiative to ask their own questions that they've been pondering in their own study, that's a deeper one.
Yeah, so true. Like that girl that asked that tender question, right? Asking questions and teaching and encouraging an atmosphere where they ask questions is huge, huge to conversion experiences, right? What else? What are some of the higher level actions that we can ask our students to participate in that have more converting power, Brian?
I think keeping an eye out for the lower level ones a little bit. When you give people responsibility, they rise to meet that level. And there was a teacher, and I saw he had a buddy system, and he paired he didn't use this term obviously, but I'm thinking of it now, like higher level actors with lower level actors, and they were able to raise them up to their level, and I loved that. I thought that was really cool.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, and it's so simple. It can be a buddy system. It can be pulling a kid aside that you see has that gas in their spiritual tank and say, hey, do you mind sitting by so-and-so and just helping them along? It seems like they're having a little trouble, and I bet you can be a great help to them. And watch that dynamic. It's so beautiful. What other higher level things can we do? Yeah, please.
There was one exercise that I did where there was a handout, and I had them write down just what their biggest fear was, and I told them that it was anonymous, it was completely confidential. They don't have to put their name on it, but that we would be passing them around. So if they didn't want their name to be on it, it didn't have to be. So I wrote down my biggest fear, and then I had a handout of all verses that talk about how we can withstand fear and how we can overcome all these different things. And so we passed, and so I'd get them and I'd hand them out, and then people would look at them, and I want them to hey, look at these verses, and I want you to give your classmates counsel on how they can overcome these things. And then we would pick them up and redo them, and then by the end of it, they got it back, and they got to see all of their classmates saying, hey, all this encouragement, and through scripture, hey, look at all these different things. And in some evaluations afterwards, they were just saying, I really loved being able to see kind of what other classmates were going through, and be able to see also that I'm not the only one going through this, and so is John, and so is Taylor, and that I'm not alone in this. And so, but it was completely, and it made them you're not. It's going to be really rare that you're going to have that one kid that's a kind of a bum that maybe oh well, you should just say something rude. People aren't going to do that when people are saying my parents just got divorced, or I'm anorexic and I'm having to deal with this eating disorder, or people have a heart and they're not going to say these horrible things. So that was something for me that I found the kids really, and I was finally able to relate to the kids because it was completely about them. And that was an experience that I found that was really, really helpful and deeper. It had made them think, and they were in the scriptures a lot of the time, which I liked.
Thank you so much. Students respond to helping each other so beautifully and run to each other's aids and are open to help from each other on a different level, for sure. So, as we wrap this up, can I give you some time to act on your own and just thinking of these principles coming up for this fall with your own seminary classes? What are some ideas that have come to mind, and what are some things that you would like to do to provide opportunities to act? And one footnote before I give you that time. So this took me way too long to figure out, but one of the highest level actions that has converting power embedded in it is bearing testimony, like has been said, or sharing spiritual experiences. One of the questions that I've come to that has helped me most as a teacher in all the years that I've taught is before I finish preparing my lesson, I will ask myself the question, what am I going to invite my students to testify of today? And that gives focus to my principles that I'm going to teach them, that I'm going to bring up. What I'm going to invite them to testify of, whether it's that God answers prayers or that He helps us through trials or whatever. And that gives me focus because that is a high-level action that I'm going to go toward in my lesson today. And those are beautiful experiences when students are acting at that level. Just wanted to throw that out. Well, the last few minutes, would you just act? What have you learned today from this about helping students fulfill their role in learning by acting that is going to carry into your classes this coming fall? You take a few minutes just to write down thoughts and goals and principles that you want to take with you as you go forward. Okay, just to wrap up, if I could share just my own experience. So I grew up in Twin Falls, Idaho, as I said before. I had a seminary teacher my senior year in high school named Brother Sturm. I think he's the dean of religion up at BYU Idaho right now. But there was one day where we were doing the devotional, and this is an understatement, I was a total weird for the seminary. Just did not take it seriously. I loved Brother Sturm though. And we were doing a devotional, and I went up to help play the piano, and two of us were playing during the hymn. And I just totally started goofing off during the hymn, and like playing different notes and making it all fancy or whatever. And at the end of the hymn, it was so laborious for the class to sing along and try to keep track of what Tucker was doing on the piano, that after the hymn, Brother Sturm said, "In all of my years of teaching seminary, that might be the hardest devotional I've ever had to get through." And when he said that, it was like, oh no, my pen's open. Give me soup. Anyway, it stabbed right in my heart. And I was like stung, because it was a rebuke, right? But he said it in a way that I knew it was because he just really wanted to have the Spirit in that room. I went back to that seat, and I sat there, and I thought to myself, I am never going to let Brother Sturm down again. And from that point on, in his seminary class, I started to act at a different level. And from that point on, my testimony started to come at a different level. That was a turning point in my life. And in the most strange way, as I look back, my teacher had the courage to ask me to act and to step up to a higher level. And whenever we do, God responds. That is my testimony. May we invite our students to act. Not do it for them, but invite them to take their own initiative. And God, like with Nephi, will always respond. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. You have a break until... No, it's lunch, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
Because I'm starving.
We got to feed that machine back there.